All right, let's dive into a source that's making a pretty dramatic claim that silver is about to have a truly historic breakout. I mean, it's a super bold prediction, so let's unpack the argument it lays out, step by step. And get this, right off the bat, they pin this whole thing to a very specific date. We're talking December 26th, 2025. This isn't some vague, sometime in the future forecast. No, they're painting a really precise picture of an exact moment in time. And on that day, the claim is that silver does the, quote, impossible. It absolutely shatters its all-time price record. We're not just talking about a new high for the year. This is presented as a total game changer for the metal. You know, this quote really says it all, doesn't it? The day silver finally broke free from 45 years of manipulation and suppression. Wow. So they're not just framing this as a market move, they're calling it a day of liberation for silver. It's tapping right into that long-standing debate in the precious metals world. So the big question is, what on earth could cause a shift that massive? Let's get into the case they build. All right, section 1, silver's impossible record high. So just how big are we talking here? Let's look at the numbers the source uses to really put this thing in perspective. Okay, check this out. This chart is where it gets really wild. According to this analysis, gold has an amazing year, right? Up 81%. But then you look at silver, and it more than doubles that return, with a mind-blowing 167% gain. So this isn't just a rally. This is presented as a historic, absolute dominance over gold. So what's behind all this? The source points to some huge global forces, creating what it calls a perfect storm for silver. Let's start with the big picture, the economic environment. Okay, so the argument here is pretty straightforward, cause and effect. They claim that when the Federal Reserve even hints at cutting interest rates, it's like pouring rocket fuel on silver. See, when the returns on things like cash and bonds go down, suddenly holding a non-yielding asset like silver looks a whole lot more attractive. And that, they argue, sends a flood of investment capital rushing into precious metals. And then there's the second part of this macro puzzle, growing global instability. The source points to things like an economic quarantine on Venezuelan oil and military actions in Nigeria as major drivers of uncertainty. The core idea is simple, right? When the world feels shaky, people and their money look for a safe place to hide. And a lot of that capital, the argument goes, finds its way into assets like silver. Now, beyond just being a safe haven, the source claims a huge piece of this story is silver's vital role in modern tech, a part of the equation they say a lot of people totally miss. Let's dig into that. And this is a really crucial point they make. The US government has now officially classified silver as a critical mineral. Now, that might just sound like a label, but it's a huge deal. It puts silver in the same strategic category as things like lithium and rare earth elements. It's basically the government saying, hey, this stuff is essential for our national security and our economy, and we can't easily get it. And this is why it's so critical. The argument is that we're not talking about minor uses here. Silver is at the absolute heart of the world's biggest tech trends. It's essential for solar panels, for electric vehicles, and for pretty much every smartphone, computer, and advanced electronic device out there. And for many of these uses, there's just no good substitute. Okay, so this brings us to the next major pillar of the argument. The source claims that all this intense, growing demand is crashing head-on into a really, really tight supply, creating what they call a fundamental crisis in the market. And this really lays out the two sides of the coin. On the one hand, you have demand just exploding from every direction. Green energy, electronics, investment, you name it. But on the other side, the source claims the supply is in trouble. The easy-to-get high-grade silver deposits, they're mostly gone. And getting new mines up and running is incredibly expensive and can take a decade or more. So that gap between supply and demand, it's just getting wider and wider. And this quote just hammers the point home, doesn't it? This is not a temporary imbalance. This is a structural crisis. So the source isn't talking about a short-term blip. They're framing this as a deep, fundamental problem that's going to take a decade, maybe longer to fix. Okay, so whenever you see a price run like this, people are naturally going to scream bubble, right? Well, the analysis anticipates that, and it makes a point to draw a very clear line between this rally and the big silver spikes we've seen in the past. And here's the contrast they draw. Past rallies, like back in 1980 or 2011, they argue, were basically built on sand. They were driven by speculation, by paper trading, by leverage, and they collapsed as soon as the music stopped. But this time, they contend, it's different. This rally is supposedly built on a rock-solid foundation of real, physical demand from industry and a structural supply shortage, things that, can't just vanish overnight. So, according to this analysis, $75 an ounce isn't the ceiling. In fact, they call it the new floor. So let's take a look at where they think prices could be headed after hitting that record high. So to make the case for even higher prices, they bring up the gold to silver ratio. Now, historically, it's taken about, say, 40 to 50 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. The source claims that as this ratio starts to fall back toward that historical average, from way up high where it's been, and you have gold at over $4,000 an ounce, well, you just do the math. It implies a silver price somewhere between $90 and $113. The argument is basically, even at a record-breaking $75, silver is still a bargain compared to gold. And really, this final quote sums up the entire thesis of the source material. Silver is the escape hatch. It's not just an industrial metal. It's not just a trade. It's being portrayed as financial insurance, your escape hatch from a system of currencies that can be printed into oblivion. And that really leaves us with the big central question posed by this analysis. Are they right? Are we seeing a fundamental, permanent shift in silver's role in the global economy, the start of a whole new era for this critical metal? Or is this just the classic hype you hear at the top of another crazy but ultimately temporary market cycle? That's the key question to think about.